it's the bird emergency, and it's one of the best days of the week. It's Friday. It's Photography Friday. I'm Grant Williams. I'm obviously a bit of a whacker when it comes to photography stuff because I can't work my green screen today. So, hello. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined for Photography Friday always by editorial photographer, and let's give you a new name, Ewen, raconteur, man about town, Ewen Bell. Good morning, Ewen.
Hi there. How you doing? Actually, I'm more the man about the lounge room at the moment because we're not really getting about town at all.
That's right. Man about the lounge room in your dressing gown. I think that's how we roll. Or for me, it's been tracky dacks. As I've said, I'm into 18 months where I have not worn anything other than shorts or tracky dacks. But we had to bring a bit of class into Photography Friday this time. Nicolas Rakotopare. Apparently, I got Nick's name right the first time I said it, although I'm doing the Nick thing. Hello, Nicolas. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. And it's not much class here at all. I lost all my class when I moved here 12 years ago. So,
well, that's right. Now, Nicolas, you're from Madagascar originally. Now, does that mean you grew up speaking Malagasy or French?
Well, I have a fairly mixed background. So since we have a bit of time, I'll go into a little bit of detail. So my dad is half Malagasy, half French, and my mom is from Austria. So I grew up speaking Malagasy, French, and German at home. And in Madagascar. So I was born in Madagascar. I lived there until I was 15.
Now, did that make you an outcast speaking German in Madagascar?
No, there's actually quite a decent German community there. My mom worked for some German NGOs as well. So no, actually, and Malagasy people are really good at picking up new languages. When you go through national parks and all things, the guides speak Russian, Italian, German. It's quite impressive.
No, I didn't know. I would love to go there one day. It's one of those places you hear about how certain ecological niches get taken up by one kind of animal, and that's what makes it really fascinating.
Yeah, it is an incredible spot for that.
Of course.
Yeah, it's the primates have taken up all these different kind of slots. Like there's a little tiny one that's the size of your thumb and things like that. Is that true?
Yeah,
Nicolas?
the mouse lemur. Yeah, mouse lemurs. Yeah, smallest primates in the world.
Yeah,
I would love to see all that. I really would.
There's a few species, but yes, it's a mouse lemurs. Lemurs are incredible. Yeah, the whole family is endemic to Madagascar. There's no lemurs outside unless a few islands where they've been introduced. But every single lemur lives in Madagascar, and there's changes all the time. But because I have a very outdated guide, but yeah, I think it's roughly over 105 or 108 species now of lemurs.
Yes, so like the lemurs do the same thing that the marsupials do here. You know, the way the marsupials take up all these different kinds of things. You know, there are large ones and big ones and ones that eat fruit and, and that kind of stuff. And that's what's really fascinating about the island.
Yeah, they're so diverse too, as you said.
Yeah, they have really distinct vegetation communities, both on rainfall, soil type and elevation that are probably more clearly delineated than nearly anywhere else on Earth, I would say. I mean, the trees are spectacular, of course. Of course, we've all watched the David Attenborough Madagascar specials, haven't we? So, yeah, great. Now, Nicolas, I asked you to join you and myself because you posted one picture on Twitter which really caught my eye and I thought caught the essence of the bird, which is what we really love about bird photography, which was your shot of the black kite that you took recently. So what got you into photography initially and bird photography, if we drill down a little bit?
Photography initially was my dad's. So my dad wasn't a professional photographer, but has always loved photography. And I always remember him just looking at camera magazines, because in Madagascar, there were no camera shops. So he always used to be reading a camera magazine, keeping updated, even before internet. And then when we used to go visit the family in France or Austria, just pretty much the first place we would go to in Paris would be a camera shop because dad needed a new lens or this new camera or this thing. And so like a very enthusiastic photographer. And through that, I got my first camera when I was, I think, on my 13th or 14th birthday. and it's still sitting just behind me. I've used it a few times this year. And yeah, through that, I just started, all starting with just, it's a little bit compulsive, just documenting what I like my life. And I was just photographing, but very quickly now, even when I look at some of the old albums, there's always a bird in there. I had no specific interest, but just curious, a bird, a chameleon, like a lemur stealing a glass of water on the table, just like always little bits of nature. And then, yeah, through that, I continued doing photography on the side. After we lived in Reunion Island, which is a French island next to Madagascar, for a few years. My parents still live on the island. That's where I finished high school. And then I moved to Paris for 2.5 years. I studied software engineering, but I was still always doing photography on the side, and I was doing it more and more. And I started shooting for a small, I get on the side for a small online rock magazine that was covering concerts and interviews for bands. And then I started doing a little bit of studio work with friends on the weekend. It's just doing more and more. And one day, it's a bit of a funny story, but my first digital DSLR I bought out of jealousy, because my brother, for some reason, bought a Canon 350D, which he wasn't good at photography. And I had this really old Nikon that was just falling apart. And I was just like, why does he buy a really nice DSLR and he's not going to use it to its full potential? So I went on the Gumtree equivalent and bought my first digital DSLR as well. And that's when I started doing a bit of the concert shots and meeting with people. I used to do these photo walks. We used to go and drink some wine in a French cafe and then discuss photography and go on a theme and like being able to exchange gear as well. And then I moved to Australia, and then it's just full of just nature photography. And what I've done as well is I did a science degree, and through that, every field trip, I was always the person taking photos of the field trip of what we were doing. And very often the teachers or the uni at the end of it was like, oh, we need photos of this, we need photos of that. Oh, no one took photos at all. Oh, this is a good photo of the topaz of that specific species, or this and that. So I did that. And through it, I was really seeing that there was an interest for sort of science and documenting science, but still doing wildlife on the side. And then after a while, I graduated, worked as an ecologist for a few years, and I lived overseas for a little bit. I lived in Borneo for a few months doing some frog research. And that's where, when I came back, I decided not to continue doing like straight research, but just going into freelance for science and nature media, because it was good with all the contacts I had and the experience I'd done, because I started doing a few shoots overseas as well, specifically on like science communication. And so that's what I did. But I've always done wildlife photography on the side and birds, because when I moved to Australia 12 years ago, I couldn't tell a pigeon from a crow, like barely. I just had no idea when I started my science degree about that and about the birds. And through hanging out with other wildlife scientists and friends and people that knew, I just bought my third field guide, some binoculars, and then it just went downhill from there. It just becomes very obsessive. But I learned the birds through the photography. I have that many terrible shots that I just took just for ID purposes, something that caught my eye that looked different. I was like, oh, that looks like the honeyeater, but it's not the same. So I photographed that, and through that, I was able to like learn most of the birds. And yeah, still do it today. It's still, especially in Australia, it's very hard if you do nature photography not to be into bird photography. I feel in Australia we have some pretty incredible birds. But yeah, that's the sort of long-winded answer, I guess.
Now, I've just put a shot up on the screen, which you feature on your website there, Nick, with my tailed tropic bird. That's a ripper. Do you have any birds that you really love to shoot?
Albatrosses. I just love albatrosses. But for just the sheer size of them, the absolute sheer size of an albatross is just mind-boggling. And what they do as well, in terms, I love things that the whole ecology of things that migrate and do like huge distance. There we are. I absolutely love albatrosses. I haven't seen enough in my lifetime, but the few times I've been able to photograph albatrosses, I always enjoy it. It's hard to pick. I love fairy wrens as well. It's just very interesting little birds, but yeah, storm petrels.
What do you think of these, Ewan? Oh, that one's a beauty, isn't it?
That's beautiful. Have you been down to some of the subantarctic islands, Nick, to see the albatrosses where they?
It's very high on the travel to-do list whenever that's happening again. But yeah, I really want to go down to those. And we're talking about before, being sort of like moving into the middle of nowhere where no one lives. And that's something I really enjoy, being in the middle of nowhere, because usually it's like when I speak with friends that ask me, why did you just spend a week driving through the Channel Country or West Queensland? There is nothing there. We just drove through and there's nothing. It's like, actually, if you know what you're looking for, it is things everywhere. And so, yeah, I would love to go to those sort of remote islands and see the birds where they nest.
There's a really great photographer who used to work for the Department of Conservation in NZ, Andreas. I'm trying to think of last name. I met him around about 15 years ago on a boat going down to Campbell Islands, and we went past the Snares, and the Snares is like part of the islands that come off New Zealand. And he had worked with the Department of Conservation for, his whole life. And he became a photographer because he was out in the middle of all these really remote places, and they were really beautiful places. But he said when he got to the Snares, he absolutely hated to be there, even though he was there for like 2 weeks just on his own camping. Because everywhere he stepped, he felt he was about to crush some kind of, like a nest or some kind of habitat. And he just felt really scared to even tread on that landscape.
Yeah, I think, I've never I've never been to those places, but that would be, that's something, it's so different. It's so you can really feel that it's so untouched that it's probably confusing to your brain, just being like, where do I go? Like, how do I do this? How do I leave the least amount of traces possible?
Yeah, that's right. So, when you go to somewhere like this Subantarctic Islands, and there are spots where the albatross, they nest on the cliffs or on the ridge lines there. There's a couple of places where you can actually get in there and just to walk up there and hike and be next to the birds. But I think that there's lots of these places where, in fact, just being there, you feel as though, you're disturbing the wildlife. Whereas if you go into the outback in Australia, you feel that you can drive for hundreds of kilometers and not actually even see a creature. It's a really different experience.
Yeah, it's probably way more plentiful, I guess, like visually and in densities on those islands.
And so one of the projects I saw that you did, you went to the Flinders Ranges.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those places where the ranges essentially come up from a very flat land. They're the only mountains for hundreds of miles in any direction. And so the wildlife, they concentrate there. And I still wouldn't say that it's teeming with wildlife, but that's where, if you know how to look, you can find them. Tell us about your time in the Flinders Ranges and trying to shoot things like the yellow-footed rock wallaby.
Yeah, so that wasn't the work project. That was a personal project with my really good friend, Craig Greer, who is a photographer based in Adelaide. And that's because I lived in Adelaide for a few months, currently in the southeast Queensland, but for a few months, a few years ago, I was in Adelaide, and we decided to go for a trip spend a few days to photograph the yellow-footed rock wallabies and wedge-tailed eagles. And we drove to the Flinders Ranges, and that was my first trip to the area. And as you say, there are, if you know where to look, there are a lot of things. A lot of that shot of the wallaby, they're just jumping. It's just, the light is gorgeous. The sunsets last a long time. And same with the yellow-footed rock wallaby. They're really not hard to find if you just spend a little bit of time in those few gorges where they're easy to see. But we just spent 4 days, and I just wanted to do a short video about the experience and showcasing. I was doing some time lapses at night because the night skies are absolutely awesome. We saw here's the mom. If you scroll down a bit, you can see the mom and Joey yellow-footed rock wallaby. That was another great moment because my friend Craig had just wandered off to try and photograph more birds, and I was just trying to get as much as I could of the rock wallabies, and they were none for a while, and then out of nowhere, that mom and Joey popped up and they were just grooming each other, and the little one was running around, and I was just by myself watching them, and it was really nice. Yeah, it's just such a gorgeous macropod.
It's amazing how hard it is to see them. I've been to one of those spots there with some groups from time to time, and we stand there and everybody's staring at the rocks. And, the wallabies are there, but we can't see them. And then suddenly one moves and suddenly you realize there's 10 of them there and that they were there the whole time, but your eyes just don't actually pick them up.
Oh, it's just incredible how well they camouflage, because on the photo, on the photo you see them, they're well framed, shallow depth, they stand out. But I have this one photo I took that is quite wide, And I always used as like a game, like try and spot the wallaby, because it's actually just behind the rock with the tail just hanging out, and it's all sort of the same feature. You're like, where is it? And it's the same with I went a few months ago. I went looking for there's a few population of brush-tailed rock wallabies in southeast Queensland, and I went and it's the same. They blend really well, really well. It's part of the game as well. I love that. I love searching for things.
Yeah, that's right. Because, the skill with wildlife photography is not really about cameras. The cameras is just a tool. The skill is actually being able to get close to the animals, or to get close enough to get the shot that you're looking for. And it's very hard to get close to rock wallabies.
Yes, very. The yellow-footed rock wallaby in one location were the most confining I've ever seen, but the brush-tailed rock wallaby was much harder. I really had to sneak and really hide myself and crawl around the rocks, because they were quite wary and aware of me at the beginning. But it's like a lot of the wildlife and the birds. The more time you spend looking at understanding, because as you said, the photography, the technical part of the photography, it might be easy to say after having done it for so long, but to me, the technical part is the easiest. It's second nature. There is no thought when I'm shooting. There is no thought in my head like ISO, speed. It's just all I think about is framing and behavior. It's just, and that's what when I do. I've done a few workshops, and when I help friends and family and things, it's always about. I'm always like, you need to get over that technical hurdle because that applies to bird photography or any photography. Because if you don't know if you're stuck on the technical things, it's going to be very hard to get shots that you're happy with. So you really need to put the sort of like the hard work into getting those, that just make sure you understand 100% of that, just the technical things, the rules, so you can then break the rules as well to do some panning shots, do some creative blurs, or like whatever you want to do. But yeah, you really need to do that and be extremely familiar with your equipment.
Now, one of the things that I see that you do really well is that you're using the light and you're shooting into the light a lot more than I think some of the more traditional wildlife guys would do. And when I look through your Flinders Ranges pics, and there's a video that you have on your site, where you've just got a quick little trip to the Flinders Ranges, and you're using the light really well. You're using it beautifully. And that you're not trying to use it for like a technical purpose. You're using it for a creative purpose.
Yeah, and I love that.
So you have a creative angle to your work. And I think that's what's really beautiful. And that's what really stands out to me when I see the work that's on your website. You're an artist. You're not just a guy who carries a camera.
Oh, that's fair enough. Thank you very much. But it's, as I say, I'm really interested in those like backlit shots, like more like emotions rather than technically in the technical sense perfect, with like the light on the right side and everything is like bright, and it's just I like it. Same, maybe it's because I would say from like a science ecology background. I really like behavior, and behavior or like moment trumps the perfectness of the photo. For me, there's a lot of like, but most of my favorite photographers from like a scientific background, they're scientists who became like nature and wildlife photographers. And they're always when I read how they work and what they think about images, I really relate to that in the case that, for example, they would say, I would rather an image that's high ISO and grainy of a good behavior than always try and strive for something that's really always clean, technically like perfect and sharp. Because both those type of image have their space, but my preference is I would rather something that's grainier, but that sort of like captivates a little bit more.
Now, because you want to, Ewan, I want to get you to expand on that point that you made. But first, a comment. I reckon you're like an adverb photographer, Nick. The action, you've always got some action, like you just focused on with the behavior, that make your photos really interesting for a reason other than the beautiful subject or the beautiful landscape. So that's just my comment. If we're on Q&A, just a comment, please. But you mentioned the light being in front or behind. Can you explain to photography plonker like myself what that's all about?
Okay, so one of the things that I think the average photographer struggles with is trying to work with light and trying to understand how cameras see light, because our eyes see light in a really different way, and cameras They can't do all the things which our eyes do. So when we see things, we compose an image inside our brain that translates the light. So if we're in a room that's got dark bits and bright bits, our brains will even that out. And the camera doesn't do that so easily. And I think that for years, there was this idea that you always had the sunlight behind you, and that's how you get a good shot. If you think back to your childhood, Grant, you would take a picture of Uluru with the sun behind you, and the sun has to be over your left shoulder kind of thing was the way to think about light. But with digital cameras, they're so good, and you've got all that dynamic range. So you can shoot straight into the sun and still actually pull out detail that's in those darkened shadows. And it's being able to pull back that range. And once you learn how to work with the dynamic range that's on a digital camera, you can work in lots of different light that gives you a different sort of creative feel that you might have got when you just do, the plainer, flatter kind of lighting. Does that help, Grant, or have I made that ridiculously technical?
No, that makes sense. But and so the orthodoxy developed with film-based cameras, and it's been able to expand as the technology has changed, and we're more able to manipulate light both with the camera, and then I'm guessing that the post photography, the laptop process of producing photography has improved.
Yeah, there are two things that the camera gave us in the days of film. One was the idea that you just need to get the light behind you and it'll be okay. And the other is that you put the subject in the middle because that's where your autofocus is. So if you can get away from those two things, I think, that's a good start. The trouble is that with the more that you go for something that's going to be creative, maybe you can't see the detail that's in a certain part of the bird, or maybe you can't see, the whole quoll as it comes out of a bush, or, that people think they need the whole subject. They feel they need to see all of the details. So there you just pass the tree kangaroo. Let's go back up to the tree kangaroo. And, that's the kind of shot that people wouldn't use in the old days because they'd say, well, I can't see the whole animal. Where's the rest of it? And I would say this is much better. This gives us character. There's character that's coming out of the light, the way it's coming through the trees. There's character in the way that it's hidden in there through the branches. It tells you something about the animal because it's in context now.
And it's also how you're likely to see the animal. If you're out looking for a tree kangaroo, that's the first way you're likely to see it.
That's right. So, Nick, when you actually were growing up and learning about photography, were you shooting with digital or with
film? Okay. The first few years with film, probably from age 14 to maybe only film from 14 to maybe 17, and then from 17 to maybe 20, it was a mix. So we started having digital cameras around the house. I forgot what the first one, a 2-megapixel camera. I still have the images. I've done, I think, a good job of keeping everything since then. So I still have those those images. Then we got a 6-megapixel Sony, then a Nikon Coolpix, which that was my dad's one, but it quickly became mine because I was using it all the time. It was always in my backpack. And then the last sort of film camera my dad has was the EOS 550. I can't remember now, but it's behind me as well. And after that, it was all digital. Yeah, he got a 400D Canon, and I got the 350D, and from then on, it's just digital. But this year, thanks to the inspiration of a local Southeast Queensland photographer, Caesar, that he's pretty much solely shoots wildlife on film. That's what he loves. That he loves the process. And now my fridge is back full of film, and I've bought a Series 1 film camera, and I have both with me all the time. And it makes it way more easy because now, after all those years of perfecting sort of the art with digital, that on your 36 images in the film, you will get at least 30 that are usable. and so it makes it way more affordable in terms of that. Whereas, when you're learning, it's what used to be very difficult. So I do shoot now a fair bit of film as well, because I just like the process as well. Because we're talking about bird photography here, but just in general, I like photography as a whole as well. I really am creating images I prefer when it's like wildlife and nature, sort of photojournalism with science and things. But I will, I've done some food photography, some studio photography. I've helped friends on studio projects because that's where I learned a lot early on about lights, like artificial light. But that's something that was very helpful down the line, just understanding how light modifiers work and things, because there's always some small parallels you can make between light in the studio that's really direct, where with light in the rainforest that's just coming through the canopy. Like it's never like lost learning when you learn about light in general in photography. And then especially because now I would say most of my work is video these days. So for the past 5 years, it's been like mainly video in terms of what is work, like what is paying the bills. And same from the thing of it's been nice to transition, but keep that sort of like aspect as well.
Now, can I just interject there, Ewan? Sorry. Paying the bills, Nick, we haven't even mentioned what your role has been for the last little while. So can you just tell us what has been paying the bills, and then we'll nerd out again on methods and strategies and equipment.
Yeah, if you want to hop on the main page then as well, there's some of the examples of what's paying the bills. But basically, for the past few years, I've been the science communication and media specialist for the Threatened Species Recovery Hub. That's part of the national.
If I stick on the Danny Texera stuff, because of course Danny's been a guest on the show, and
that is how I discovered the show.
I did put this pick up before, and I'll do it again. Danny actually gave me this one to use for her episode, and I didn't realise that you had taken it. But you've documented Danny putting out the bioacoustic recorders for the glossy black cockatoos.
Yeah.
Now, having spoken to Danny but not met her, I reckon this captures what I think about a Danny, really serious and committed, and then really into her subject.
Cheers.
But there's fun Danny who doesn't like being the star.
Yes, that is also very true. Yeah, that's true. It's
that's a beautiful shot of Daniela, I think. So
basically what I've been doing for the past few years is documenting all those threatened species research projects. I've been extremely lucky, and I've been to some amazing places. And my role was to make short documentaries like that basically it's filling the gap between someone doing like incredible science on threatened species and publishing about that in scientific journals, but those things are very targeted and niche audience. And so by bringing all those like sort of high impact visuals, both stills and motion, we could reach a whole new audience and let people know what sort of work is being done around Australia on threatened species. Because the Threatened Species Recovery Hub covered a lot of different projects, were involved in a lot of different projects, and it's been great. So that's what I've been doing for the past few years. I do other tasks as well. So I mentioned that before ecology, I studied software engineering, and same as I was saying with studio lights is a skill that never goes astray. Same with IT and software engineering, something that's helped me throughout all my careers, whether it's in ecology when I had to do mapping, satellite mapping, some coding or anything. It's been very helpful. And it's the same for photography or video, because it really helps understanding, as we're talking, the technical aspect of it before, the process, what actually is an image, how does light affect the sensor, what can I do viewed through like this very technical lens and knowledge, or like codecs in video, how video actually works, what data rates, all the sort of like real nerdy but super fascinating things I really like. And it always helped me, whether it's in science or like creating images. So I do like other things as well for the Threatened Species Hub, looking after the website side of things, and a lot of other, like all the technical stuff that no one wants to do that is related to media and science communication. I do. So I do that with the Threatened Species Recovery Hub. I'm also the communications officer for the National Malleefowl Recovery Team. Okay. And so I do all their social media, newsletter, and they have a really good archive of camera trap videos and things like that. So I use that and I edit that in new, like sort of, I tailor it for social media as well, because they have everything in this specific format. But because I spend a lot of time on social media for my own photography as well. So I'm pretty across how things need to be to have the best impact. So I edit things like that as well for them. And I work freelance on the side.
Ewan, are you a codec?
I am. You've got to know what the hell your codecs are doing when you're working in video. Video is 10 times the work of stills. It really is. There's so many things between the data wrangling, the way you're capturing. You've got to think about shutter speed differently. You've got to think about, the data rates on your cards. You've got to think about how it's captured in terms of codecs, whether it's a codec that's going to be good for editing downstream. You've got to think about, the chroma capture rates and things like this. It's just a ton of work to jam into your brain. And I think not everybody should actually step into it until they're absolutely ready. What do you think, Nicholas? Should people just jump in anyway?
Well, they might jump in anyway and jump out and never come back. So that's the risk if you jump in straight away. You really gotta know what you're in for a little bit, because as you say, it's a very different photo and video. And there can be nowadays you have so many like great free software to edit videos, and like phones are great at filming. So people get a bit more into filming with the phones and making like small edits. But if you really want to get into the next step, there's a huge divide between the ease of a family trip video on iMovie and actually getting into something like a bit more professional, because it can get complicated quickly. There's a huge amount of resources online for free to learn, but it will take time. It is, and you need to know that it's all very technical and odd little terms.
Plus, I think that there's a point at the beginning where it's really fun because you're actually creating something that you hadn't actually created before. And it's really, there's a joy that comes out of that. There's an energy. And then at some point you step into that point where it's very technical. You're having to actually deliver something to a client, to a specification. Something goes wrong. You forget to capture something or had your camera set in the wrong way and you can't use that footage, or it doesn't tie in well with the rest of the edit. And suddenly it's not fun anymore. How are you keeping the joy in your work still, Nick?
Well, it's like when I'm filming, I'm so lucky, like that project or projects in general, I get to go to some amazing location, a little bit less in the past 18 months, but yeah, I've had some, it's just, as much as I'm always stressed, I'm like, all right, I'm going to have no power for 7 days. I'm going to have to shoot all day long. It's going to be 43 degrees, or all those things that come into play. But the joy is there just because, I don't know, that's what I love doing. That is what I love doing. I love editing as well. So I know that after those long trips, I'll be at home and I'll be able to like create things, and I'll be able to, just the idea of telling people about all the great work that scientists, Indigenous rangers, NGOs are doing across Australia. It's so important. It's so needed. And it just gets me excited. And it's a lot of freedom in a way as well, because even before the pandemic, I was working from home. I'm well set up in my home to deliver. I have the right equipment and people trust me to do things on time. So it's a lot of like freedom. So although it can get a little bit overwhelming because I am working by myself all the time. And so you have a lot to think about: the audio, the video, then the aerials, everything that sort of like needs to come together. But that's also something that I think has helped me. And I've heard feedback that's something that why I've been rehired on some freelance shoot as well, because my background in science, I have done cage trapping, camera trapping, failure trapping. I have been identifying. I know the wildlife. And so I know what shots are possible or not. When I get a call when I chat with the team at the hub and they're like, all right, we need to do like a video on that project. I'm like, oh, it's mammal trapping. And I already know what will be possible or not. And that's great, because I'm not going to ask the scientist what's a quoll, or I'm not going to ask them, all right, so I need like a lot of daytime footage or this or that. I know, all right, all I can get for the quoll is maybe like a little peek out of the bag, him like poking, measuring the tail, and then opening the bag. And then I need as many cameras as possible to hopefully do this. With quolls, they never do. They never do. I have this, we caught the same northern quoll 2 nights in a row, and we knew where the den was. So I set up 5 cameras along the path where it usually runs back into its den. It ran around and behind every single camera I had set up, every single one. So the joy is just that it's always new, always in amazing locations. Sometimes it's just in labs as well, but it's always fascinating. I did a freelance story a few months ago at the hospital in Brisbane on artificial heart research, and it's medical research, very different than the usual science I do, but fascinating as well. Learning, I guess it's just that I'm still constantly learning, although I'm not doing research myself. I'm always learning and always surrounded by people that have dedicated their life to this sort of knowledge, and then it's exciting. And I'll always when I take time off, it will always be for like personal trip. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks, I went to Western Queensland, just took a week off, and I drove and I just grabbed my camera and I went to visit some friends near Longreach. And then all I did was just spending time with friends, talking wildlife photography and doing all sunset and afternoon photography sessions by myself, just driving around the small national parks around. And yeah, I guess that's my way of keeping sane as well, because yeah, it does some projects, because there are some projects I don't get to shoot. If someone had some phone footage from 3 years ago, the project is done in terms of field work. I still have to edit it. And so those things are the harder ones to do because I didn't shoot it. It's not a lot of content and everything, but it's still I like the challenge of trying to make something to the best standard possible so people, again, know about the project.
And do you feel that the work you're doing is reaching an audience in a way that, that you haven't actually been able to reach, say, if you think about the way that science communication used to work, and now we have a much richer kind of a platform that we can work with to reach out to people. Do you feel that what you're doing is actually connecting to an audience and helping to make people much more conscious of the good work that is being done?
I would say absolutely. We have fairly large platforms with the Threatened Species Recovery Hub, between the website, the social media things that we have. Plus, I use my own platforms as well. And it's a sort of like everyone that is in that area as well is always keen to share. So it's about that sort of like broader community, even people that aren't involved in that project, that know someone that worked there. Through Twitter, it just gets pushed so far. And I've had a lot of discussions over the past few years with people that weren't directly involved with threatened species or anything, but I've heard about the Threatened Species Recovery Hub, or have heard about a quail project, or this bird project, or this just, and it's not just the Threatened Species Recovery Hub, there's now other organizations that are realizing the power of doing that. And because when I first started, and things have changed a lot in the past 5 years, but I feel a lot of organizations were still stuck in that mindset that to get something that works and that really to a decent standard, you need a whole crew, you need to get the TV involved or something like that. Whereas nowadays, you can definitely get, if you get the right sort of person that's ready for this sort of conditions and this sort of shoots. Like I said, I work by myself all the time, and I can do aerial shots, audio recording, and videos and photos on the same trip. And it's a lot of bit about like expectation management as well. When you're working with someone that's not familiar with that, it's like, well, I'm by myself. This is what I can do. And I feel like there's a few sort of like people doing similar things popping up around Australia, doing it for a different organization. And in the past maybe 2 years, amazing stories come out. I've learned so much from what Bush Heritage is doing, AWC, things like that through those channels. Because yes, I'm in touch with the scientists at work, so I can read the papers, but I also really like to follow their socials and see what's coming out, and they're doing a great job. And I feel like it's really reaching a huge audience. So yeah, like I said, not just the Threatened Species Hub, but everyone that's doing something along those lines, threatened species research, wildlife research, nature research. It's been great. And lately I've been extremely fortunate in the past sort of 3 years to have been able to document like that Karajari trip, a lot of two-way science projects where it was a mix of Indigenous rangers working with scientists. And it's been absolutely awesome. Last week I was on the West Island in the Northern Territory with the Lee and Thiwara Rangers and the Kirikawa Rangers. They came from the desert because they both work on cats, on feral cats, but in very different ways. So just went on an exchange, and I documented that on the island. And I feel extremely privileged to having had access and having been able to spend a week there. And just through that, and just through me being talking to my close circle about, because my family, I don't have family in Australia, but my family around the world has no idea where I am most of the time, or sort of why I'm filming this or that. But just through talking that, because I think people underestimate the sort of reach it can have to talk to your sort of close family, friends, entourage about your passion and what you do. And that actually that can ripple effect quite bigly. I've heard some people that just knew nothing a few years ago, and just osmosis by hanging out long enough around people like me or the friends, developing a small interest, or being noticing more, or being more interested in things like that. So yeah, to go back to the original question, I do think that it's really reaching a new and a very enthusiastic audience across all the platforms. And it's really good, because it's one thing to do great research, but it's if no one besides your peer here, it's harder to have impact with it. So it's just this great add-on to really push it further.
Nicholas, I picked this photo to have a look at, and for the audio audience, it's a picture where you're looking at a bit of science happening with the Indigenous community. Can you tell us what this picture is, who's in it, and what it represents? And then I want to say what it tells me before we get Ewen to comment on it.
Okay. Yeah, so it's an image. So it's in the Karajari Indigenous Protected Area in Western Australia. And they're currently looking, I can't see on that resolution, but I believe it's a leopard skink. And on the left, you have Bayo, one of the Karajari rangers. In the middle, you have Jackie. She was the coordinator at the time. And on the right, Marissa taking the data. And basically what that project was about, reinstating a traditional burning regime to benefit the IPA and biodiversity at the same time. And so they were running I was there documenting one of the biodiversity sort of surveys that they were doing post-fire. And yeah, so they're looking at this skink. The guide you can see at the bottom, the field guide, was developed by them as well over the years, with all the photos that we're taking of the critters they're catching, and they're recording the data. So the idea was the scientists are bringing the protocols that in that way, when they're doing their biodiversity surveys over and over, they can input the data in a way that can actually be used in the more traditional science framework down the track as well. And so that's where the sort of a collaboration joins in. But yeah, it was nice. The light was often very nice when we were doing the traps, because early morning, late in the afternoon, I have never seen as many flies in my life as on that trip. And it's probably one of the hottest, most demanding on us and the equipment trip I've ever done.
I picked this out, Nick, because it says to me where science is going in Australia. It's got the Indigenous people running, being the major part of the program in terms of information gathering. You've got a resource that was developed with them, and it's field work. It's out there in the field. There's no white coats or anything, which is still the traditional view when someone talks about science in the media. That's still what we think about, a lab, test tubes, microscopes and white coats. But this is the science that is happening all around us. And in terms of biodiversity, which is our emergency in this country, this is science. And I think you've got it all in that.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. This is science that's happening more and more, and that's why I feel very lucky to have been able to document a few of those projects. So that my website's not really up to date, but at least there's a few. I'm glad that I had a few on, so you could pick that one. But yeah, because that stuff, I've been to so many projects that work in the same way, and so it should be. Indigenous people have been like custodian of the land for so long, looking after it for so long. And like that, as you said, that image, that's how it should be. And that's how it is in a lot of places, but not everyone knows or hears about it. So that's why I'm really happy to be able to bring my cameras along. And I'm always so privileged that they allow me on their country and show me around and talk to me about how they feel, what's everything. It's just all of those stories, whether it's the science, the culture, people need to see the incredible work that's been done by Indigenous rangers all across Australia.
All right, I'm trying to think of the next name.
Yep, sorry, we've strayed a bit from bird photography, as a sort of like pure thing. But I guess it's something that's what pay the bills, and that's also one of my favorite thing to do. So I'm very lucky that I get to do that.
I think at the heart of this, the phrase that comes up for me through this conversation, I think really makes a point, is that you need to know your subject to shoot your subject. I think that's the key thing. So many people really struggle with that because, they're thinking about their cameras. They're more concerned about what brand of camera they have than what they're going to photograph. And the brand of camera doesn't matter. What does matter is, do you know your subject? And the more you know about your subject, the more you have something to say about your subject, the more you'll understand what is important about this subject. If you think about the quolls, what is it that you want an audience to know about a quoll? And that becomes your challenge. How do you then actually capture it? Did you see that TV show called A Quoll Farm that was done in Tassie? That was amazing. I can't believe he managed to put that together. That was astounding.
And didn't that take, I think it was 4 years, start to finish, I think.
It took a while.
Of getting that footage. When I watched that, and for people who have not seen it, it was basically, there was a deserted farmhouse that quolls in the neighbouring area were moving into and using the outhouses and the farmhouse, which provided a fantastic location to shoot behaviour of quolls. And he documented a couple of families, I think, for 3 generations, I think, about where they went and what they did. But that wouldn't have paid for itself on its own, would it? So the dedication of going there and committing all that time to do the photography and then the post-production and having another job, I mean, that just amazes me about nature.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing I think we need to fund really well, because you get so much back for such a small spend. You know, you think about what gets spent to shoot a TV commercial, and I know a little bit about this. There are plenty of commercials that are on TV now that cost something like $500,000, and you think about how much you could get back for $500,000 if you give it to Nicolas. You know, you'd get a lot of amazing stuff you'd get back, and the whole world could enjoy it. But instead, we end up with a 30-second commercial. And there's something wrong about that. There's something broken in the system, that we're not funding people like Nick to go out and to bring the world back to us, because that's what we want to see. We want to see the world, and we can't all we can't all be there with the guides. We can't be there to see the quoll actually come out of the bag. And we don't want everyone out there. You know, we don't want hundreds of thousands of people saying, well, I'm going to go and purchase a camera and let's go trample, the Western Highlands trying to find this, this rare bird. We just want some really good quality work that's coming back so that the rest of us can see what's out there. And I think that would be a really positive change to properly fund this.
And as you say, I think it has nowadays you could do, that's what I was talking about before, the sort of change of frame of mind of people thinking that you needed like a huge complete TV crew to just do something, showcase what your organization is doing. And that whole like frame of mind is changing, which is great, because you can do a lot with not like an outrageous budget. You can do things, and with whatever budget you have, you can do something. And it's great to be able to see that, because that for me sits, you have your blue chip documentaries, which are incredible, like just big productions spanning like years of shooting and things. But I think like those like lower end other smaller productions and things to let people know what is happening. Yeah, it's a massive return on investment for sure, because people need to know what's happening or need to know about specific things to care about them. If they don't know about quolls, they won't care once someone is like, well, that quoll is now extinct, and they never care. Same with bird species, and yeah, that's why I think there's a lot of things coming out, great little things on Asian honeyeaters, and people need to know about the birds, because if people don't care about things they don't know about.
Yeah.
And to go back to what you said before, just made on the parallel bird photography, because you're saying you need to know the subject and to really create images that is telling a story, compelling. I mean, that works to me, at least in my experience and opinion, works on every line of like media. Because before a project that I'm going to shoot, I sit down and read a lot about the project. Anything I can get my hand on, I will just read what other like documents has been done on that project before, or what's the literature available on the Karajari work, on the IPA, or like on their website, on the Aboriginal, all the things. And it's the exact same with birds and wildlife in general. If you want to get better photos of birds, because when we say you need to know your subject better, to start with, you don't have to spend 3 weeks every morning looking at that bird and trying to find it and trying to understand what it's doing. But just by reading about it, getting a field guide, getting the books about bird ecology in general, just trying to get those concepts in your brain, and then learning more, because there's so much information out there And the more like information and familiar you can get with your subject, whether it's birds, wallabies, a research project, the better, I think the better images you will create in the end, or you set up yourself for the best possible images.
What do you think is the future for the threatened species recovery hub at this stage?
Well, there's a few months left, and then it's so from what I understand, the threatened species will now be part of the new hub, but not as a threatened species entity. It will just be part of other projects. But I think it's left an incredible legacy, that's for sure. Because I've only been working with them in various roles for a few years. It's been going for longer than that, with a different name before as well. It's still under the National Environment Science banner. But the legacy that it's just incredible. And I think through all those years, it's created a lot of like new collaborations and projects that will live on for a long time and motivated people to keep on going. I would have really wished that it continued for another few years, because I think it was doing really well, but it is what it is. And that's why, I'll be going back to more freelance work, but I keep on doing the same.
Do you think you'll try to find a new project that has that sort of the long-term focus, rather than just to dive into projects here and there, but to have something that you can be part of for, years to come?
I do like this idea, because I do like the way I have things like setups, having this one sort of long-term things, but still doing a few other freelance or things that I cherry pick on the side as well. I think it works really well for me. But there are a few projects around Australia where that sort of things could be applied. It's just a matter of, I guess, talking to the people and seeing who has budget and the need for that sort of stuff. But I do like that, because you can, when you have the sort of like long-term things, you can really make, I think, even more of an impact.
Yeah.
I didn't need any more depressing after the IPCC report about the future of the recovery hub. Can I get us back to something a bit technical? You're talking, Nick, about aerial shots. I think a lot of people would be interested to know about working with drone photography. Tell us what sort of an entry-level drone is like, and how should people be thinking about using it? Because I don't think humanity needs any more shots of someone standing in the middle of it looking up at their drone. So how are drones really useful in project photography?
Okay, so it's been an incredible tool, absolutely incredible tool, both for filmmaking, photography, and science. Just a quick side note, I don't know if you've seen the latest ABC Catalyst episode, The Wildlife Revolution. Anyway, I would highly recommend it. It's on iView. It came out last week, and it's with the legendary Ann Jones chatting about things, but they're showing a great example of how a drone is used for wildlife monitoring using thermal cameras. And that's one of the uses that's been done a lot. For me, for this project, how I think they are used, and it's a real, well, first, it's a cheap way of getting an aerial shot. But if you don't need to go like very high, it's way cheaper and easier than a helicopter. But it's been really good for me in a pure filmmaking sense, an establishing shot, getting people a sense of a location, where like what is this environment, where are those people working, or where is that animal living. That really, it's a great tool to showcase that. But it's also a good tool to showcase specifics about the project. So I've done a lot of shots where we had, for example, like unburnt versus burnt country. And I was able to fly and pan the camera down. And one of the Karijari shots is like that. And I put some notes on the video. And I'm flying by. You can see the difference in vegetation communities across the road, unburnt versus burnt, because it's part of the project. So it helps you give people even more of an idea of like what they meant by, fire does affect this. It really helps with that, just that sort of things. And they're really nice shots in terms of like the connecting people as well. It's just, although you said we've seen a lot of shots of people like in the park, but they are like really well. The one thing that is a little bit problematic, but it's always like that when a new technology that allows you to like film where you aren't comes out, is people need to be really mindful around wildlife with drones, because there's been a few issues over the years. It's a lot of animals can perceive that as a threat. You don't want to be harassing wildlife. So it's always good, as with as we said before, there's a lot of good resources online, especially I found the legislation in Australia very, very clear in 99% of the time, very clear. It's all online. You have all the quiz. You have everything you need to know about what you can do. You have apps, and it's different in every state as well in Australia compared to, I know a little bit because my dad also flies drones for fun on the small French island where the legislation, it's very different and it's very complicated to find anything. So Australia has done like something that's quite good. So I would recommend, people really look into that and find that information. There is a range of drones. You don't have to get my drone is actually quite old. I'm fairly notorious amongst my friend group to like very slowly update my gear because I rely on it so much in the difficult conditions that I have something that works. And I don't want to always buy the newest shiny thing because just in case it's just not doing exactly what I need. I only upgrade when it's actually bringing me a benefit and it works the way it needs to in all conditions, whether it's hot, cold or not. It just got to work. I remember that photo really well, the one you put on the thing, because I was so out of breath at that specific moment.
Tell us about the setup.
Believe so I haven't looked at this. That's the thing. I do bird lists, not necessarily to count, because my memory is absolutely horrible. And a bit of striated laughing thrush, I believe, in the Annapurnas in the Himalayas. Because so I've been to Nepal a few times, and on that trip we were going to do a trip hiking to Annapurna base camp, and I was like, it's a lot of beautiful landscapes, portrait photography, and time lapses. And I was like, do I bring my bird lens? I was like, it's old. Again, it's an old lens. It's heavy. And I'm like, do I take it? And I ended up taking it because I was like, I'm going to see things that I shouldn't not take it. That was a few years ago. And then it was one of the hard days of hike, and I was just resting on this rock, completely drenched in sweat. But I had the camera around my neck all the time, and it's quite heavy, but I think just took pity of me and just sat there perching perfectly, looking at me for a few seconds so I could get that gorgeous shots. And it made that's my favorite bird photo of that whole hike. Took a lot of other landscape and time lapse and things, but that's probably, the bird was just very nice to me. Sometimes, I would say 99% of the time birds know when you're focusing on them, and they're just waiting that split second that the autofocus points just lock on the bird's eye, and that's when they fly off. They must have that sense. I'm pretty sure they do, but he was just nice because I was suffering.
Did you pick up on the key phrase that Nicolas used, Ewan? For me, it was, I had my bird lens with me. Of course, you have to tell us what your bird lens.
It's probably going to be surprising because, again, I don't have a 500 because, like I said, I do love photographing birds, but I do love photographing a range of things. So after I graduated university and I started working, at the time I had a really old, very bad quality 70-300 Canon, a very old one. Then I got a 300 f4, old prime that worked so nicely, so lightweight. But I spent a lot of time around the hinterland rainforest. I'm always in dark areas. So I wanted a 300 2.8 because I also like photographing sports and larger animals as well. And after 2.5 years of saving, first big prime I could afford was this old version of the Canon 300 2.8, which I bought, and that's what I still use today with the 2x extender. That's why I was saying I'm not too much in the. I would love a 600 that's super sharp, but then I'm happy with the sort of results I get from my 300 2.8, which is extremely sharp to start with an extender. It's good enough for me to take the photos I need to tell the story. So it's a bit of an odd setup because I've often heard the saying, if you spend all your time with an extender on your lens, you have the wrong lens. But fair enough. But it's also really, it's a very personal thing. I have endless discussions with friends about the gear and equipment, and I'm notorious to always be like the downer of like telling people like, you don't need to spend on that, or tell me why you want to buy that, like just other than the fact that it's brand new or it does this, or like, do you actually need that? It's like, no, but it looks. It just looks. So do you actually need it? Or like, can you actually buy that one and spend the rest of the money on a 3-week trip? to do something like that. I'm always like, they always come to me when they want like discussions about the things, because I always love talking to people and just making sure people get the right equipment for like what they actually want to do, rather than something that's like just because it's expensive and nice.
Ewan,
Plus,
can
also,
you decode
I
that
think
a little bit about extender rings and 300.
Okay.
So let's just assume that people know what the camera body is and it's got the lens, but can you expand that gear description?
As it turns out, I actually did something really similar probably around about 20 years ago. Was it that far back? Maybe not quite that far back. I also had some Canon gear, and I got a secondhand 300mm. I think it was the F4. I didn't get the 2.8 just because of weight. Because weight can be such a big issue, right? So if we talk about a 300mm lens, that's a pretty good telephoto. You know, that's some good reach. But you've still got to get pretty close to birds. If you're, you know, the smaller the bird, you know, the longer the lens that you need. So 300mm is good. But if you put a 2x converter on it, the converter goes between the camera and the lens. And so once it's on, you generally don't want to take it off, especially if you're out in the bush and everything's wet, or especially with dust, you know, because changing lenses in a really dusty landscape, that can be an issue too, because you don't want dust on the sensor. So once you've got it on, you've now got a 600mm lens instead of a 300mm lens, but it's about the same weight as the 300mm lens that you started with. So, you know, it's a really good way to upgrade. The downside is that the converter is going to lose light. So the autofocus is not quite as fast. The image maybe is not quite as sharp. But if you can get twice as close, that's a really big win, especially with smaller birds. And so here, this particular bird, the striated laughing thrush, and I've seen these twice in the Himalayas, and they're just such gorgeous birds. I don't think I've been that close. The lens I carry gives me roughly 800mm lens perspective, and I didn't get anywhere near as close as that. So, you know, this thing with the lenses is that you can do more by changing your behavior than by changing your lens. You know, I think that's the really key thing. It's great to have some brand new gear, but the problem that I see is that I see people end up with lots of gear and they can't carry it all. You know, they can't take it all on their trip anyway. You know, you can only pack so much. And so just to have more gear doesn't necessarily make your photography better. Just have, you know, like if you're carrying 6 cameras, you're not going to take 6 times the photos, are you? You know, you can only hold one camera at a time. It takes time to change over. I did a review for one of the 600mm prime, and it was beautiful. It was a great lens, and I got some gorgeous shots, but it took up the entire back seat of the car to get it anywhere. And that's a problem. That's a really big problem. So, you know, there's this trade-off between, yes, you can get a better lens and you can spend $15,000 and get a sensational lens that'll be so much better, but you've still got to get it there. You've still got to haul it about. You've got to work it. And I think there's something to be said for saying, you know, not just here's the gear that I can afford, but here's the gear that's going to work with me being out in the fields, getting closer to birds, you know? And so if you're doing this handheld, I think that's a really big thing to think about with this conversation, handheld versus having it on a tripod with a gimbal. If you've got there's a size of lens, depending on your strength, you know, that you can hold and actually handheld and still get some reasonable shots. And above that size, you need to have it on a tripod. And now you're not just carrying a bigger lens, you're carrying a very big tripod, you're carrying some heavy gear, and it's not just the time it takes to set up, but what bird's going to come near you if you're standing there with a great big rig and a bunch of sticks and you're taking up the whole space just to set up this really big lens. That's going to be very hard to get closer to a bird and to react to the moment. You know, that moment you had here in the Himalayas while you're walking down the path, you've got to be able to respond quickly to capture that moment, right?
That's exactly right. And that's a philosophy that I really follow in terms of, I don't own a gimbal. I don't have a gimbal for my wildlife photography because I'm just walking around and as I do have like a tripod that I will set up myself on, but it doesn't even have a gimbal. It's usually more for like when I have several tripods for filming as well, but it's the same for photography and filming because for the way I do wildlife photography. I just like walk around, look for things, and yeah, I want to be like mobile. And it's a big thing, as you said. When I was in Western Queensland 3 weeks ago, my friend kindly loaned me his Canon 800 Prime, which is so heavy. It's sharp. It's great. The reach is awesome, but it is so. But also so impractical. I'm used to shoot from inside my car, just driving along the tracks, looking for kangaroos and seeing slowly at sunset birds. Because in the car, it's easier to approach things. Sometimes they don't see you as like a threat or anything. But that lens is so big. I was having trouble just like moving around inside my car. I was literally just like banging against everything. And then usually you just poke it out of the window with my 300 and extender, or sometimes I've borrowed 500s. They're quite good and compact. That works. But that 800 was just it hard learning curve to the end. And then bird in flight, like the first 4 days, it was impossible. It is literally impossible because the lens with the 1D on it's so heavy that you get the shakes very quickly. And so rather than being able to wait and track and hold your arms down against your body to be stable, you really have to like, all right, now I'm going to go, and it's too heavy. And I'm sad to report that I took maybe 50 or 60 photos of a gray falcon in flight, and none of them is nicely framed or nicely in focus because I could not track at 800 millimeter. Handheld, I had so much trouble tracking the bird in flight. It demanded so much. You get used. Like my friend has that when he's more used to it, the field of view and everything. So it's yeah.
Well, I think it's not just that it's a heavy lens, but it's easier to track a bird at 400 mil than 800 mil because you just got a wider window to keep it
wider, more space.
Yeah, it's really difficult to track anything at 800 mil. It's a very long lens.
It's a very long lens, and and I do the same for like when I'm filming, because often the thing is that I see like my work in terms of like documenting the research projects around Australia, more like sort of like science photojournalism or video journalism, because I'm along with the people documenting their work. It's not like we're all like in a team making like a program where we have a producer and everything. It's just me documenting. I have to be quick. I have to like follow them. We're going up that Mesa in the Pilbara. I have to be as quick as everyone. I have my big bag with my camera in the back and everything. And so same, I have never used a gimbal on any of my shoots because I do like the sort of documentary look as well. Like if you know how to like handheld a camera, it's even if it's moving a bit, and especially with like IBIS now and stuff. But basically, yeah, like I always go for that thing of like, I would rather be unencumbered and deal with a little bit of shake and not having to always like put the camera on the gimbal, follow the person, like, because that works, that has its place, but it like in when you have more time, when you have like, I guess, bigger production, but when you by yourself like that, and so that's what I do with the photography, and that's what I do with the filmmaking. I just set up myself so I can just follow. We have to like push through the bush and just bash through and get those shots, and like when tracking that feral cat, and yeah, you just gotta do it, and there's no way I can do that if I had how I'm shooting now is pretty much I'm like maximum like gear capacity. I have my work, like my sort of setup done, and that's about it.
Can I ask you both to just tell us what your basic gear is for going on a trip like you just explained, Nick, with where you're following along a team of researchers, maybe banding or something like that. What do you throw in your backpack? What is the essential take?
The essential take would be, so my main camera is the Canon 1DX Mark II. I've had that. It's my workhorse. It's just been incredible. It's just been through everything. It looks very sad because it's been through everything, but that's why I love that the Canon 1D series. They're very robust. They're built for that sort of work, and very reliable as well. So that's always my key thing. It has to be reliable. So if it doesn't have all the latest bells and whistles, it doesn't matter. It needs to be perfect at that specific job I need it to do. So I have the Canon 1DX Mark II. I will have usually I don't take a long lens on those shoots because I don't need one usually. And if I know I have a long lens, I might be tempted to start looking at the birds around. So I just don't have it. I have a wide angle, a 16-35 f4. I have 2470 f4 as well, both because the way with filming, how filming works, you can afford way lower shutter speeds than you can with photos. So the f4 is actually quite practical. Like it still works very well for me, even in lower light environments. And until now with the mirrorless lineup, it's a bit different, but Canon did not have 1635 or 2470 2.8 that are stabilized, because for the video, I need the lens to be stabilized. And yeah, that was a very interesting shoot. I can tell you a bit more afterwards if you want about that. But so 1635, 2470, both Canons, and the 1DX Mark II. And I have a shotgun microphone, a pair of like wireless microphone as well, a small LED panel if I need to. The good thing as well with that 2470 f4, it has macro modes, which enables me quickly, without having to change the lens to a macro, to be a super close up of whatever they're looking at. Again, like antechinus ears, done out teeth, something like I can do that with one lens, and which again, it's all like being quick and without having to change all the things all the time is really like paramount for me. And I have my video tripod with me as well for sometimes when I do have to set up like interviews or things like that. But that would be it. Those two lenses, that camera, and the drone with an old DJI Mavic. But the first edition, I bought that one in 2017. 2017. Yeah, I've had it since. It's just works for what I need to do, and they're all in my bag that you see on the. I have two of those bags. I have a really big one and a small f-stop gear bags, smaller, like a 50 liter for like smaller trip, and a 70 liter when I need like a bit more. But that's the basic: two lenses, one camera, two types of audio recording equipment, and the drone. That's like bare bones for the trip.
And how much does that weigh? That's what I'm wondering.
As long as no one from either Qantas, Virgin, or Jetstar is listening, it's usually around, because I add the laptop and a few things about that. I can 15 for the backpack, 15 kilo usually for like that's the regular thing, and which is pretty fine on Qantas these days. They allow you 14, so it's good. And when people usually see like what you're carrying, they're like, yeah, you definitely can't check that in or anything, because I will have a second, because that's what I take with me, but I have a bit more in my check-in luggage as well when I go on a trip that it's not car-based. But you never want to have all your equipment in the check-in, because if something gets lost, you can't shoot. So that's why I say that's the bare bones, because even if I get to the destination and my luggage doesn't make it, I'll be wearing the same pants and t-shirt for a week, but at least I can shoot the story. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's
you can still work.
That's probably the hot tip out of the whole episode is that you never put everything you rely on in one place.
Yeah, no.
Because bag snatchers do exist. Luggage does get lost.
Luggage does get stolen. About half my gear was stolen out of my luggage in Madagascar on my last trip.
Yep, that's unfortunately a common thing. Ewan, what's your go-to setup for wildlife bird photography?
Well, it depends on the trip and what I'm doing as well. So I've got two different ways to go. I've got the full frame and I've got the micro 4/3. So it depends on what the client needs. So like I was doing some Tassie Devils and Quolls down in Tassie for National Geographic, and I knew I was basically going to be with keepers and inside contained populations, not out in the wild. And so I could shoot it all with a 50mm lens. Actually, you don't need a telephoto lens if you're in the same cage as an animal. And so the full frame stuff is the stuff that I like, because I like that shallow depth of field. And, when you've got a 1.4 50mm lens, you get very shallow depth of field, and that makes the background nice and creamy and all that sort of stuff. And that's really nice. For things in like the Himalayas, like I did a trip to Bhutan where I took Ray Martin to Bhutan, and we were trying to launch this brand new camera, and he had like the full frame and I had the micro 4/3, and I was there to shoot birds and he was there to shoot people. And that was the concept we had. And so with the micro 4/3, I can carry a telephoto, a wide, and a 50mm perspective, plus a drone inside a single camera bag. So all of that can fit in there. And, in terms of weight, we're talking something closer to 5 kilos than 15. And it's just, it's just a different the scale of everything is different. The smaller your sensor, the smaller your lenses and all that kind of stuff. So there's a downside on the wide angle because you need to go extra wide with the smaller sensor, but there's an upside on the telephoto. And with the telephoto, particularly with the ultra long telephotos, the super telephotos, you're going to get some nice sort of shallow depth of field the longer your lens anyway. You know, depending on the separation between your subject and the background. So, you don't have to have like an f2.8 to get some shallow depth of field. If you're at 400 millimeters, you can still get that creamy background. It's just that, the wider your f-stop goes, the creamier the background is, and so that's why we love the full frame gear, because you just get that beautiful soft background and that kind of stuff. So on something like a G9, I just want 3 lenses. I want my wide angle because you always need to get that wide scene and get that context. I want my 50mm perspective because that's really the workhorse. And that's where I'm going to get my shallow look. Even with the smaller cameras, you can still get that shallow depth of field sense. And it's great for portraits. It's great for still life. It's great for lots of different things, that 50mm perspective. And then I want that telephoto. And in my particular case, the 100 to 400 I've got, which gives me an 800mm perspective on the G9. It's so tiny. It's the size of your water bottle. It's not very big. And it means that I can have a second camera that's always got the telephoto and one that's got the wide angle. And I can just basically reach for one lens or the other and I'm set to go. And the reason that I want two cameras, because if something goes wrong with one of the bodies, you need to have an extra body. You can't just go out with one, because if you're like a week out there in the middle of nowhere, it's a long way back to get a brand new camera. And the other golden rule I have is that if I'm going to have 2 cameras, or more, I want all the cameras to use the same battery. One single battery system for all my cameras. So I don't want a full frame plus the micro 4/3 because I don't use the same thing to plug in, because you're going to run out of power on one and you're going to, grab the spare battery. You don't want to have different sets of batteries and different sets of chargers and all this kind of stuff. So one battery, one lens system, but you need that spare battery, that spare camera body. And the other thing that's really great with something like a G9 is that you can power it off the USB. So I can charge my G9 off my laptop if I really needed to. I could charge it off like a solar charger. I can charge it off the Land Cruiser. That's right. You can bring those 2 things. Yeah. So, and I think this is something that will become standard with cameras really soon. I think that all of them will eventually end up, the idea that you can charge your camera over the USB makes your entire workflow much more practical and, much more flexible, and to not have to worry about running out of power, to know that you can simply top it up when you get back in the car, or to top it up off a 12-volt system when you're at the camp, is just gives you that, that peace of mind that you're not going to run short. Because with the mirrorless systems, they use more juice. They're going to use power. They're going to run out much faster than a conventional DSLR, so that's something that you got to keep in mind. And especially if you're shooting video, you're working the system much harder. You're drawing much more power when you're shooting video. And I guess the other thing I'll say, in terms of a startup kit, right now, for something like $2,000, you can get a G9 with a really good telephoto lens. That just gets you started, and that gets you into the game. And that's not a bad starting point, and the problem with camera gear is that there's this thing that you can't afford to buy the gear that you might want to use. It's hard to try it out. You don't know what you need until you actually get to try it out. So Nick, when you tried out the 800mm, I bet you're glad that you didn't buy one now, because it's not the right fit. And it's an expensive thing to learn, to buy the lens and then find out it's actually not the lens you need. You needed something different.
And that's why I was saying, when I said earlier on that when I was learning, when I was living for this few years, I lived in Paris when I was part of that photo website, and we used to do catch up on weekends, and we were all just trading gear for an hour or two so we could test them. That's how I got to try my first a L lens, a Canon L lenses prime. My first 85 1.2, I remember the first time I tried that one, the depth of field was insane. But in Australia, there is more and more places where you can rent gear, and that's something I always tell people as well. If you can, if you want to, you really want, like, you think you really want that lens, rent it for the day, take it out on something that you would usually shoot with, or a bit longer. It's a bit, some of the very big lenses are expensive to rent, but on something a bit more like regular 24-70 or something, there's plenty of options in the main cities only. But there are like a few places, and I would always recommend that if you can always like rent or borrow from a friend before you buy it, because it goes a very long way. And I was going to say that my second camera that I check in is a micro. I'm on one of those people that have different battery systems, because all my main equipment, because of that, for all my work, whether it's like for the hub or anything like, or I think I use my personal equipment as well, because I like that. I like it. But my second camera is the one that the hub has, which is a Panasonic GH5, which is an incredible bang for buck filming camera. Even today, it came out a fair few years ago. They're just about to release the new version of it, but it's small, it's light, it delivers incredible. Yeah, it's just great. So that's the second camera I have with me.
We actually got to do a shoot with Panasonic when they first launched that camera. We got them to come over to Laos, and they brought that camera. We had this amazing guy to shoot some video, and the camera was just out of the factory. It hadn't quite been all, the firmware wasn't quite there yet and all that kind of stuff. And we went to Laos and we did some stuff down the Mekong with the monks and all that kind of stuff. And the camera guy was just like, wow, this is the future of video. He was really excited, the guy that was shooting the video, and it looks so harmless. It doesn't look as though you're carrying a professional camera. And the footage that he got out of it was incredible. Absolutely incredible.
It's awesome. The file size is great for what you get out of it. You can put it in. It was one of the first cameras to be able to shoot in 10 bits at that sort of like a camera size. And it's launched so many small, like I think like indie production companies and things around the world. I've seen a lot of, it's been used in not the latest series, but the one just before that. I've seen it a lot that convert into video camera traps, because it just has the, it's like bang for buck. And because I vividly remember I was watching this documentary, and there's this shot of this tiger walking through, and I remember looking like that is what camera trap contraption is that? What is this? And after a lot of like sleuthing and digging out, I actually found out the blog of the person who built them for that specific sequence, all GH5s. Right. And as you said, Micro Four Thirds, you get that extra reach. And it's often dismissed, but it's a great option for someone that wants reach in a light package and great lenses. I ran one wildlife photography workshop in Sri Lanka before the pandemic, and that's something I wanted to like continue, because I spend a lot of time in Sri Lanka and I have a lot of friends working in that area that we work with, and it's a great place to learn wildlife photography, and it's incredible wildlife and culture. Anyway, and one of our clients had a G9, and first she was very surprised to see that she was, out of all the lenses we had, she had the most reach, because she had the same setup as you. She was like, wait, that little camera is an 800 mil, and you with your huge thing is only like 600. And I was like, it works in very like, so it was great, because you got the conversation started, and after the first like sort of few days of training and things, she got some amazing shots. But it's great. That's what I love today. That's why I like talking to people about more than just like, oh, this is the newest shiny thing, buy it, because it's actually, because this newest shiny thing might be the right thing for you, but might not be. There is so many options. And coming from that software engineering background, I love technical things, and I know how they work, so I can direct people to what they actually need, or try and explain it to them. I think it's really fun to do.
So just to drop back into something technical, you mentioned the 10-bit when we were talking about the GH5 when that came out. So I think it's worth actually trying to explain that a little bit more. And I think it'd be good if we talked about not only 10-bit, but also shooting in log gamma. Now, are you shooting in log with all of your video work?
It's not necessary. It makes the workflow just a little bit too long for me. There's so many things to go through that I very rarely do that. But for my freelance work, absolutely. I shot for a UK documentary earlier this year, and they had an episode on Australia, and I shot half the episode. And for that, I was able to try the new Canon C70, the new little cinema camera, and shot everything in log. Yeah, and because I wasn't editing as well, I was just providing the sort of log footage to the editor in the UK. But yeah, to go back to the 10-bit thing, so trying to give like a parallel to people that don't really understand or don't really know like a video, but basically it's like RAW versus JPEG. Like your JPEG is an 8-bit file, so like that's the 8-bit is sort of amount of data you would get per pixel, whereas you move that to 10-bit and you have way more latitude to edit your footage afterwards, whether it's shot in log or not. So basically, your 8-bit footage, it's like a JPEG. It comes out as is. You can do little correction, but it will quickly break if you're under or overexposed. It will quickly have some banding in the sky, whereas your 10-bit footage will have way more latitudes for that, the color correction and the just exposure compensation as well afterwards. And it's only now most cameras shoot 10-bit footage, but it took a while to get there. The GH5 was one of the first one. And when we spoke about like a gamma log, S log, basically to get the most out of, a lot of the professional cameras have that option, and to get the most of them, you shoot in a log profile, which again, I'll use the analogy of being like, it's like you're shooting raw, as in there is no color correction applied to your footage by the camera. You get this really gray, dull looking footage, but it has all, just like a raw photo, it has all the information embedded in it and allows you to color correct to an extent that you couldn't have done if you had shot, if the camera had decided. And a lot of cameras have that. And even GoPro, like my GoPro, I shoot, it's not called log, it's called ProTune. And I will shoot in ProTune a lot of time, especially underwater, because I want to be able to color correct myself. I don't want to rely on the camera to decide what color things should be, because sometimes it's a great job, sometimes it doesn't. So it's this extra option you can have. If you know you want to spend 3 weeks color correcting that one clip, you can do so. So yeah, that's like how I explain.
Look how long it got before anyone mentioned a GoPro. Do you both use one?
No, I don't own one.
No. Yeah, how often do you use it, Nick, and what for?
For my sort of like science work, it's usually for release shots, because it's a very easy thing to put like on top of a trap or next to a bag or that sort of stuff. It's really good to do time lapses as well, quick time lapses these days. It has really nice speed ramping mode, which is if you do a time lapse from like a day to night, it will do a very nice clean transition. They do that really well. And the latest versions have really high resolution footage as well, like up to 5K on the latest GoPro. So they're not, as with everything that has a tiny sensor, not great in low light, but where they shine is in the stabilization system. They have an incredible inbuilt software-driven stabilization that looks at all the gyros and stuff, and you can just walk through and it looks like you're on a gimbal. So there can be some nice shots. You put it in front of a car. And for all my underwater thing, because I don't do any underwater professional work, because that's a whole other level of things. But yeah, for all my underwater, and again, you can actually get some really nice, provided you're filming things that are quite big. They're not great at macro, but you can get some really nice footage. And really nice. My favorite underwater video I've ever done is shot with an old GoPro 5. And it's mainly due to the fact of what I was filming, but I shot in a ProTune as well, so I was able to color correct myself afterwards. And I was filming 2,000 barracudas like swirling around us, and with the GoPro, it's a nice wide angle, gives you really this sense of like, wow, this is incredible. And yeah, so I use them for personal underwater when I go diving, and mostly releasing animal shots when they jump out of the bag. They have really good slow motion as well. Now, the cameras have caught up a little bit in that area with like sort of frame rate. You can do really good slow motions with most DSLRs and mirrorless cameras today. But a few years ago, like to go to a 240 image per second was something you couldn't really do unless you had a GoPro or a phone.
Well, we can just go on and on
forever.
But I've only got a couple more things I want to ask you, Nick, and Ewan chime in. Ethics for taking a photography of birds and wild animals, Nick. To feed or not to feed?
It's to feed in very specific conditions. For example, like by feeding, I mean like a plate of water in your garden. I still consider that feeding, but I feel like in Australia, that is something that is not detrimental. But besides that, to bring things, it's always, I have a lot of discussions with a lot of photographers about this, and same with call playback as well. I think you might have. You were going to ask about that. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You know,
so yeah. I don't. So it's all like personal choices, and I think there's a whole spectrum of things how people do it. So I've done call playback for work when I was doing research in that capacity. I don't bring a speaker with me on the field or anything. I will do the odd, like try to get something to look at me, which like I feel like I have very little success with things that very poorly like interested in my like noise skills. But yeah, I would say feeding it has to be super well done, super like informed, super transparent as well, like why it's done. If it's not necessary for something like very specific, for example. The thing that comes to mind is, I have never been, but the hide in Melaleuca in Tasmania for the parrots, because they have supplemental feeding. And that is like photography with feeding to me that is acceptable, because it's part of the recovery process of that species and very well set up. Because if you don't do it, if everyone starts feeding like random things left, right, center just to get a photo, and first, it's not great for the wildlife, but also there's a lot of issues, I think, with like disclosing things online, people that don't disclose exactly when things like that have been done, because that gives the younger photographer the wrong idea of like, oh, it's all those shots done like it's how to do that, and then just pushes people to do things that they shouldn't. Whereas if there is a lot of like honesty and disclosure about, oh, this was done, or I've removed this branch, or this has happened, or I've used this, people need to be more open about that. But if you ask about me, I don't have a speaker with me on the field. I never use that, or I never set up branches as well. I just take things out.
I'm the same as well. Yeah, look, I feel the problem is if everybody goes out and does it, then you have a problem. And someone who's going out professionally to capture images of a particular species so the world can understand that we need to protect them, I feel you've got a bit of justification to do things like feeding or calls or whatever, because you're trying to collect that content so the world can see what's out there. So the argument about that doesn't hold once you translate that to 10,000 people in the suburbs here, all actually going out and using bird call. I saw a guy in Royal Park who was there for probably 2.5 hours, because I saw him on the train going out and I saw him on the train coming back, and he was in the same spot. He was taking shots of pardalotes, and he was just hammering that bird call for 2.5 hours in one spot. And he had set up a log, and then I saw that guy on Facebook, the next day, and worked out that it was him, and other people had commented, and it just made me feel sick. It really did. That, because at that point, it's about him. It's not about the birds.
Exactly. If it doesn't benefit, if it's not for the benefits of the species, or like the actual education, if it's just for pure ego, that's the problem. That's the thing. And there are no clear guidelines. There is some, if people are interested about feeding birds in the garden in Australia, because there's always that question, because every country ecosystem is different, and there's a lot of things happening in Europe that people are like, oh, why can't I do that here? The supplemental feeding in winter and things like that. But I believe there's really the only sort of not really pamphlet, but breakdown of guidelines, what you should and should be doing if you really want to feed, what you should be doing, not necessarily in the sense of just for photography, but for having attracting birds to your yard. I believe Professor Darryl Jones did it was also featured a lot in Australian Geographic, talking about the sort of urban wildlife interaction, how to do it if you really want to do it, what's the best way to do it. But that's broader rather than just photography. But I think it's something people are interested in reading more about that, be more informed. That's something that's a name they should Google, because it's really associated with that.
It's actually something I have tried to ask people at BirdLife. I've tried to raise this question because I want to know what their opinion is. I want to know what their standards are, and they don't want to answer. They don't want to step into that conversation. And I find that a little bit disappointing that I can't get an answer from people like Sean Dooley.
There's two issues. There's that one about what you do in your own backyard, but then the question I asked you, Nick, was really more about what do you do when you dealing with a wild subject. Like, do you take, a container of bloodworms with you? And, that kind of thing, that for me is a problem. But I should remember, because it was someone I talked to recently, but I can't remember who it is. I can't remember if it's in an episode I've released or if it's one coming up. But that supplemental feeding in Europe in winter has actually meant some rare birds that migrate no longer migrate where they used to migrate. So that raises that issue about if the feeding is withdrawn, what happens to subsequent generations of those birds? Now, I can't remember who I was speaking with, but I've got it on, I've recorded it somewhere and it'll be out sometime when I remember it. If I find it and it's not out, I'll point people to it or tell them where it's coming.
Because I think that's, to go back what you're saying, it's that the reason why they might not want to answer. It's such a complex issue where without hard evidence data, it's hard to be definitive or give someone a really in-depth educated answer. And it's a very, I don't know. It can be an emotional topic as well.
If you just imagine that you're that pardalote, and
constantly looking for who is here, who is calling.
That's cruel and unusual punishment. If you flip that for an Australian thing, that's putting someone in a cell and playing, people shouting at you for the entire day. I mean that.
Yes, so, it's you're at home. Someone knocks on your door. You go, but there's no one there. Constantly,
and they run around the back and knock on the door, and then they run around your side window and knock on the door, and you're running around the whole day going, "Who's there? Who's there?" I mean, that's it. Don't do that, people. Please don't do that. Yeah, and that's just it's bonkers.
One of the flip sides here too is that if you look through your social media, and there'll be certain accounts that post lots and lots of birds. Some of them are really nice people, and they simply go for a walk every day, and they're showing you the birds that are in their neighborhood, and they're really lovely. And every now and then you'll find one where they just look really perfect, and every shot, one after the next, it's the same shot because they're just, they're just using the branch. They've got tons of separation. You can't even tell what the background is. It's just this completely blurred out background, totally soft, and a bird on a perch of some sort. And it's the same shot every single frame from one shot to the next on their feed. It's really the same shot, just with a different bird. And it's not interesting. They're great shots on their own, but you put them all together and it's oh, okay, I see what you're doing now. This doesn't look good at all. So I would argue that there's also a creative reason just to step back from all of that. And that's why I love the idea of birds that are in, where you're peeking through the leaves and you see them back in there and you just see part of the bird, just like the kangaroo tree, a picture that we talked about before. It's in their context, but also you can tell that it's actually where they live. It's not a stage.
And that also goes back to that original image you're talking about, the Grant, the black kites photo that I posted. I'm not sure which one, because I posted two, but the one, my favorite one of that morning where there was so many black kites, so it was north of Mount Isa, is the one where the bird is tiny in the frame and you have the trees and the rocky outcrops. And I really like wide framing of wildlife. And it's great. In the past few weeks, I've seen a lot of sort of younger photographers as well, really just going hard on those wider frames. Just the bird is smaller. It doesn't always have to be because it's nice. Everything has its place, but I prefer when the animal is in its environment, because people can ask questions about it. And it's sad that often we all just see a photo on a small screen, but it just, when you see the bird in its environment, what it's doing, where it lives, if you have that plus some close-ups, you have a great setup to tell a story, or to just, you have the close-up so you can see the details of the beak and the feathers, but also that wide angle where you see the bird flying above the me side. You're oh, that's a cool rock, or oh, that's some cool eucalypts. Just, there's so many things you can do when you have that range of shots, and I think people should really think about that as well, rather than always try and focus on being the super close, super close up of everything. Trying to bring back, zoom out a little bit and bring back a bit of that surrounding, and see how they like that and where that's taking their photography, just looking at things a little differently on top of getting some nice close-ups.
What I liked about that shot with the black kite of yours, Nick, when I reached out to you, was that when you see black kites, they're always doing that tumble turn, and you had it, you caught it just as it's about to do that tumble turn that they do. And, of course, when you see them, that's what you notice them all the time. The agility in the air, which is, completely different to the way, falcons and whatnot behave, and that eagles just don't have because of their bulk. So, yeah.
Yeah, that twist tail on the side,
where I always think of the swimmers doing the turning at the end of a lap when I see them.
And they can do that and dive really quick, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, Nick, really the last thing for you that I've got is what bird haven't you shot that you really want to shoot with your camera, not John
Always
style? So your bucket list bird, and is there somewhere that you haven't been able to get to yet that you dying to go?
Well, I will answer the second one first because it's something that I've always really, and we spoke about it, and I always really wanted all the sub-Antarctic islands and just all those places because it's just the landscape and it's full of albatrosses and pelagic birds, and they're just incredible birds. And I would love to go to some of those, like cold, windy islands in the south. And as far as like a single species, it's so hard because I don't know, it might sound a bit corny, but I do get like pretty much. I was very excited to see photograph a gray falcon 3 weeks ago. But also every time I walk down my local park, I chat with the fairy wren. I get excited and like, oh hi, like I don't know. It's just people think I'm crazy, but it's just all those things. One bird that I really like to see, I guess I have right here, is the palm cockatoo.
Oh yes.
I think they have a fascinating, mainly for their looks and their biology. It's just the drumming parrot. I really like to see one.
And of course, you know the answer to this question. What's the best bird?
Sorry, the best bird.
Yep. What's the best bird?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, actually, there's two answers: every bird and any bird.
Okay.
That's a great
I thought you were going to say the bird that you have on you or something like that.
Well, right in front of you. That's like what's the best vaccine? Yeah, the vaccine you can get. Yeah, no, I think that I like that attitude, Nick, where every bird will offer you something if you have a camera in your hand. I think, and the same with any experiential bird watching. It's not just a willy wagtail. It's a pretty complicated dude who is attracted to his own image and doesn't like anyone cutting his lungs. So
that's it.
They're amazing. They're amazing. Nicolas, your website, what is it? Where can people find it?
It's lerako.net, lerako.net, and it's the same on Instagram, just lerako, lerako. And yeah, there's a range of things. Through that, you can go on to YouTube as well. There's a range of videos. I do post more and more. So it's just short videos about birds. Just like I pick a bit of footage I have of one species and I make like a little edit of them. I had masked lapwings visit the yards last year with little chicks. And so I sat under the porch and just filmed them for a while, just put it out for whoever wants to see it. But yeah, I just like to do those few things. And if you're interested, the next two upcomings are the cassowary. I have a bit of cassowary footage and square-tailed kites.
Love the kites.
Wonderful.
Ewen Bell, where can we consume your content?
Well, if you head to ewenbell.com, you'll find lots of stuff there. Lots of stuff. Yeah. Some birds, some travel, some me, some ideas, the blog. It'll be great.
And can we tease some Ewen about an upcoming rebirth of a project?
Nope, we can't just yet. Not until we have more details.
Just yet. It's
That's
under wraps. Okay, and of course you can find my stuff on Twitter at The Bird Emergency. You'll find my snark and sark and conservation pleading. I don't know. It's gone from encouragement to being, I don't know, panic outcry. We have to bunch together and do something. But I don't know how we do it. Strategy meeting later on, gentlemen, on that point. And by the time this goes out, thebirdemergency.com you'll be able to see nice pictures and listen to every episode. I'm Grant
That's
Williams.
exciting.
That's Nick Rakotopare, and that's Mr. Ewen Bell. This has been Photography Friday. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.